So before I get started, Christopher, have you got your wallet? Yes, there he is. Good work, good work. After Marty's fantastic talk, I felt I had to shift a few slides out. Tom's was a challenge. I'd like to pretend that I'd prototyped a hoverboard in 6 minutes, but I've never done anything that important in my life, so I didn't have to change much after that. But I would love to share a topic that I think Marty touched on and give some specific examples. And my talk is essentially around whether purpose is becoming more important, something that I think was Marty's #1 point. And I'd love to share 2 stories to start that process. The first story is one that I've seen just looking at a lot of startups, and I've seen the evolution of startups and the stuff they look at, the stuff that they think is important. Now, for a while, the thing that startups would show that would bring me out in hives is a business plan. Like a big, thick business plan. We've heard this morning why that's probably, I would say, negatively correlated with success of a startup, because it shows you're probably focusing on the wrong stuff. Then after that, the next one, which I saw a lot of, which I think is even more ridiculous, was startups pitching based on how many lines of code they had. Are you serious? It's bonkers. So again, that one was a complete fail. You can see during Tom's talk, I didn't have any slides to move out, so I just did ridiculous transitions for you all. The next one, which I saw startups doing a lot, was this idea of like a splash page, a sort of teaser where they collect names. Now that's only interesting if you told people what they were signing up for. It's like all the time you see startups say we've got 1,000 sort of pre-orders, we've got 1,000 people down, but if you haven't explained what you're doing, it's irrelevant. It's not a vote of confidence at all. And then the final one, which we spent an hour doing this image in the studio yesterday, was around pivoting. Pivoting, it's just promiscuity. It's being promiscuous. It doesn't tell you anything at all. Like, pivoting does not necessarily mean progress. What we have to ask ourselves when we see someone pivoting is actually, are they going towards the solution, or are they just running away from the problem? And the reason I really want to stress, particularly to product people, is we have to remember this, because the good stuff, the valuable things that we can all do, are going to be hard. Like, one of the best things my dad told me, which I'll come to sort of reminder, is if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And startups are like roller coasters. Products are like roller coasters. Paul Graham at Y Combinator showed it like this, which I love. We all start off our projects, and we start with a sort of, we get really excited, but we have no clue what we're talking about. We've got this sort of ignorant optimism. And then we hit the wall. Well, oh dear. Suddenly, I actually at this point have informed pessimism. It's a lot tougher. And we have to get through that sort of trough. We have to drive through it. And if you're doing any product that's valuable, you're going to have to go through this. You have to. And then you get through to where the value is created, which is informed optimism. We heard this morning about times that, even amazing businesses like Mind Candy went through this trough. Michael probably went through multiple troughs like this. But we've got to keep focused, because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And that's the thing to remember with the sort of lean startup approach is, I love the idea of being efficient, but it's not an excuse to run away from tough problems. It's not an excuse to just pivot as soon as you get to the first sort of challenging time. And the second story I wanted to share, which sort of helped me evolve a thought on what I'd love to give you sort of 4 ideas today. But the second story is I've kind of watched Facebook and Zinger recently. I've just watched how we're all talking about them, and I thought it was interesting because we're all talking about them in a really similar way. The press are, at least. You got Zinger, you've got Facebook. The press has been horrible for both. It's like, it's ending everyone's lives. The stock crash is a disaster. It sounds similar. You've got when they were founded, Zinger 2007 versus Facebook 2004, fairly similar. The growth of both businesses has been astronomical. 333 million uniques versus, for Facebook, 900. The share price correlates really well because they sort of are interdependent. They make money from each other, so that looks similar as well. But the weird thing to me is I feel completely differently about those two businesses. So everyone looking at those products out in the world is seeing this data and they think, same thing, both disasters. But getting ready for this talk, I was thinking, I feel really differently. And how can I actually sort of scramble into this and understand why I feel differently? And I think the best statistic I could come for this was on a website called Glassdoor.com. So Glassdoor.com is a place where you can rate your employer. And what was fascinating to me was 93% of Facebook employees would recommend working there to their friends. How many for Zinger? 49. That's pretty low. Less than half people would ever recommend working there to their friends. That would worry me deeply. And I think, actually, there's other reasons for this sort of ambivalence of the people that work there. And I'd love to spend the rest of this talk sharing some learnings of actually how we can build happy teams, how we can focus on growing great businesses, and how we can make sure that number, which I would suspect is a really big leading indicator of whether a company is going to be successful or not. Now, if you think about it, on the assumption that you've got smart people working for you, and there are smart people at both of those businesses, surely whether they would recommend working there is one of the best leading indicators of whether you've got a good business, a good product, whether you're doing something important. So the 4 learnings I'd love to share. Again, this first one overlaps with Marty's point. And I call it purpose, the idea that actually we have to have a purpose in a startup. And the reason we need a purpose I've touched on. We need to actually kind of, build some importance, some value in what we're doing to drive through this trough that we discussed. You're going to have tough times with any product that you're working on, and having a purpose is a way to actually bridge that gap, to push you on through. And I think you see often stories that probably give Facebook, I'm creating the impression I'm completely in love with Facebook. It's not necessarily the case, but I think they actually probably have a pretty important purpose. It's shifted over time a bit, but you see stories that reflect it. Their purpose is give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. There's some challenges with data and all of that stuff, but they get stories like this from the Mail Online, which I read is sort of one of the biggest hit sites in Europe at the moment. Unbelievable, the rate of growth. Whereas Zinger's purpose, they have one too. Like most businesses have a purpose. It's pretty easy to create one. It's kind of problematic if we can't. Theirs is to connect the world through games, but you struggle to find stories that bring their purpose to life. They'll talk about the amount of money they give away, but it's so important for all of us to actually have stories that reinforce our purpose. Open IDEO, tiny compared to those. We're only 36,000 users. But we had a pretty clear purpose. That was to design better together and do it for social good. And that purpose, I think, has enabled us to build a team of some of the best people at IDEO to take this forward because it felt important. Now, it's easy to look at this sort of grandiose stuff, and I probably already sound a bit like a preacher. It's absolutely, I've done loads of products that are utterly ridiculous. They haven't lasted as long, but I've done loads of stuff, sort of frivolous fun in terms of products. But I think, we can relax about this because, and again, we've heard reasons for this, great businesses evolve their purpose over time. And it's okay to evolve. Like, a lot of people seem to forget that when Facebook, the precursor to Facebook in 2003 was FaceMash, which was pretty much hot or not. Kind of wasn't that, they'll sort of shoehorn in a purpose with the benefit of hindsight. But the important thing is to continually reappraise why you're doing stuff, because your purpose can radically shift. Another good example, which many of you will know, is Jawbone. Jawbone's a great business. It sort of almost died 5 times, but it was founded in the 90s to actually create sort of mobile voice recognition. So almost like a Siri early on. But they realized to do that, they had to have great noise cancellation, and they built that noise cancellation technology, and it took them into Bluetooth. And they had a headset for that around communication. And more recently, when they created the Up, their purpose migrated again. Purposes are always migrating. Another great example, so Jason Goldberg founded a site called Fabulous, which was a gay travel social network. He got well over 100,000 regular users. He'd got some significant traction, but he noticed one little bit of the site was getting more traction than anything else, and that was a daily flash sale around great products. And he pivoted this business, in a good way, to fab.com, which we all know really well. So when you guys are looking at your product or your startup, it's okay if it's hard. It's okay if it takes some time to actually understand why you're doing it. It's okay to feel down about it at times because, you know, Peter Thiel draws this diagram. The best startups are ones that seem like a bad idea, but they're actually a good idea. That's the place to aim in the middle. And I'd just add, if you really want to scale and actually attract the best people, I'll come back to that at the end, it's important to also do stuff that matters. I'd love to now dive into some specific examples of it, but I think I just wanted to include one more diagram which I think sort of epitomizes it, and this was drawn by one of the founders of IDEO, and it was his ambition for the company. I think it's about the most beautiful, simple articulation of this stuff, and this was the image he drew. This was the business he wanted to create. I think it sums it up purposely, and I see daily the people that are attracted by this rather than being pulled by the right-hand side. So my question for you guys is, what is your product's purpose? And if you don't know it today, that's okay, but set something. I mean, why don't we put every month in our calendars 1 hour window to stop and reflect and say, why are we doing what we're doing? What's our purpose? How's it changed? What have we learned? Why are we doing it? If I had to explain to someone why what we're doing is important, what would I say? Just put that meeting in. Just an hour a month. And I think it will just remind people why what they're doing is important. Now, the next thing is, you know, I mentioned Zinger has a purpose. Most great startups have a really clear purpose. The problem is they lose sight of it. And I think the main reason we touched on KPIs or metrics. Now, metrics are a trap because we always focus on them. We always dive straight into metrics. Now, you better be looking at the right ones, otherwise you have a big problem. And I think one of the biggest problems in design, in products, is actually we start designing for the wrong metrics. So I've got a couple of examples that I think bring it to life. So here's the first one. So Business Insider has a pretty clear purpose, I think. They want to aggregate, report, analyze stories, and deliver them to you at a rapid pace. Now, they have a certain aspect on their site which really brings me out in hives. It's horrible. It's just a horrible example of that purpose. And that's this idea of including slideshows on a news site. Now, why do we think they're doing it? Why do you think they're doing it? Come on, shout. Blatantly advertising impressions. So probably the metric they're working towards is impressions. And it's pushed them away from their purpose. Another one that frustrates me a little is the idea of Facebook likes as a great metric of whether you're making progress. They can be important, but if you look at this campaign, there's an interesting bit of analysis done by the BBC actually on this campaign, and they found of these 3 million likes of the Mini, the largest constituent group that have liked it was 18 to 21-year-olds in Thailand. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing if that's your purpose, but it's probably not. So this is what Eric Ries would call a vanity metric that's just distracting you. So in your startup, start looking at the metrics. What are you judging progress by? If you've got a dashboard of 500 metrics, it's irrelevant. What are the 2 or 3? I'll come back to some ideas of what they might be. But I think some of the smartest people recognize this, and they deliberately choose to ignore metrics. So Paul Graham, amazing investor. I hold him up as probably one of the top couple of investors globally. Incredibly inspiring guy. He thinks through what metrics to ignore, and one of them is whether his startups get follow-on funding. Because he thinks he'll make crappy decisions today if he thinks too much about his old stuff that got follow-on funding. It's too much noise. And so going back to our analysis, our sort of thoughts on Zinger versus Facebook, I think this is a good example of something that actually Zuckerberg did very well. He deliberately avoided revenues being the key metric. Now, we'll see whether actually he can keep that up against the sort of bulls of Wall Street. That's going to be tough to do. But I admire the way that he focused. And I think this quote, which you can all read for yourselves, is in sharp contrast to some of the stories that you hear came out of Zinger in the early days. So this was a quote that just worried me deeply and shows, I think, the wrong metric in action. So I funded myself, but I did every horrible thing in the book just to get revenues right away. This is the problem with the idea that if all you're driving for is revenues, it's not good enough. It has to be the right revenues. And so against all of these metrics, do they match up with your purpose? Do they align with the purpose you've got? On Open IDEO, I was guilty of this. I looked at things, when I said Open IDEO is small, as I talked about the number of users, because it's an easy thing to talk about. Again, it's a vanity metric. I'm more interested in whether actually it's having impact on the ground in 160 odd countries. That's a metric that matters. So my second question for you guys, my second thought is actually, what metrics tell you if you're tracking your purpose? I love, most businesses, most good businesses are just a function, for me, of sort of 3 buckets of metrics. The first is around acquisition, second is engagement, and I would love us to start putting the third as purpose. So can we track maybe just simply one metric for each? Acquisition, engagement, and purpose. Most of us have acquisition and engagement, but virtually none of us have purpose. How would you quantify progress against your purpose? So my third thought is actually, as product guys, as designers, I think the purpose is a really valuable design lens. I think it's a lovely thing to look at your product through. And I think it enables us to do some important things. And the first one, which is kind of, maybe a little obvious, so forgive me, but the first is no is a massively important design or product decision. It's about the best decision you can make, just saying no. And the lens, the decision you're making should be no because it's not aligned with your purpose. And there's some great examples of, good saying no, for want of a better description. Instagram's a good example. So to be fair, Kevin, very early on, actually had the perspective, he wanted to lower the bar for producing and sharing awesome images. So what did he do? He said no to producing conventional 4:3 images, or 16:9. He went square, because that was in line with his purpose. He said no to high resolution, because he wanted it to be fast. When he was releasing some of the first product updates, I don't know many people that have ever had the bravery to do this, he took away features. When was the last time you actually did a product update taking away features? So important. You can do it through the lens of your purpose. Another example which inspired me, I found on speckyboy.com, is Basecamp. They pushed a new update. The resolutions destroyed this, so I'll have to explain it. What they basically decided is their purpose is clear: promote and enhance collaboration between a team. So on one of the most recent updates they just faded the nav bar into the background. So this is as it was before. This shows it very much faded. It's not this faded. It hasn't disappeared. That would be aggressive. I think I'd like that. It'd be a good story. The nav bar is there, but it's very light because they want people to focus. And Amazon, I think, do a good job of this. They did so Amazon, you can see, importantly, this is there. I recommend buying this. It's got 3.5 stars, by the way, uranium ore. It's got to be good. But their ambition is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. And one of the smartest bits of analysis that I think they ever did was they looked at response rates. And they found that every time their site stalled by 100 milliseconds, it reduced their sell-through by 1%. 100 milliseconds, 1%. Again, it's a design decision to say no to have the site load faster. Pingdom should be Pingdom should be a product guy and a designer's best friend. We talked about how the engineers, the developers and designers and product managers should work hand in hand. This is the exact reason why. This is user experience. They don't care about what we call ourselves, our titles. And again, going back to our example, to be fair to Facebook, with that purpose, give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected, they held back on advertising for a long time. You know that there's advertisers that would just queue up to be on this page, let's eat grandma or let's eat grandma. This is actually a page around how punctuation is important. So you know they queue up for this, but they stalled, they waited. The next thing that I think we should do through the eyes of purpose is we should get better at designing defaults. Like designing a default is, again, a really amazing opportunity, an amazing design opportunity. And actually, Ben Terrett of GDS recently actually mentioned desire paths. Have any of you heard of desire paths? So we see these all around us. There's heaps of them in London. This is one in London. It's the idea that we as product guys or designers have a sort of idea of how we should structure shape, how we should structure the world. So whoever kind of smarty pants came up with this, I think their idea was you'd have to walk all the way down here, maybe, actually no, that's probably a desire path, so you probably go down there, back up here, round here, to do this route. Again, we can't force people to do something that's completely unnatural. And I love the idea of looking for desire paths in products, in digital products, in any product. I'd love to do it like on this one. So Yahoo, to me, is just, I worry deeply about their homepage. So their mission is to be the most essential global internet service for consumers and businesses. I'm guessing that doesn't mean they have to have everything on the homepage. They should design a default, a desire path. And that, I think, is one of the reasons Google was so successful. That's a desire path. A tool that I quite like using just to sort of understand what desire paths might be on digital products is Crazy Egg. So founded by Hiten Shah, interesting business. Does anyone use it? So it's surprisingly little because, particularly for the startup guys, big companies can usually afford more sophisticated technology. But for the startup guys, it's interesting. It's kind of like a heat map of how people use or view your product. So what they do is they assume that where you put the cursor is an approximation for where you're looking, which it works out is true about 88% of the time. And then they could deliver, and you just put an SDK in, and they will deliver you a heat map of how people are using your site. I love the idea of you guys actually, as product people, overlaying a heat map of how people are using the site and thinking of this as an indication of desire paths. Like the fascinating thing is people are sort of, the search functionality in this example, people are using the search box a lot, probably as a desire path, a hack. Interestingly, it seems to be the word hit on hit enter that's actually sort of driving the behavioral data, the push. So that's interesting to me. The next thing is this. Like I look at this desire path. People are starting at this page, migrating down, and actually spending their time here. I have to say, there's a case for elevating this up. There's all sorts of sort of desire paths implicit in this that we can learn from. I'm trying to do it with Open IDEO. I look at the search box. Search is a really interesting way to do it because search is revealing desire paths. So those of you that have search boxes, it's actually an interesting feedback loop. What is it people want to do with your product? Just get a data dump, even if it's a CSV, around what people are searching for, because it will tell you where you're failing, where the desire paths are missing. And actually, Google, to their credit again, I use them because I think it's just a beautiful, simple articulation of this stuff. Google, to their credit, are actually, this is a default action here. I've typed in start PU, and they've actually pushed me to assume that I'm start out. Again, defaults, incredibly powerful, and they can happen off platform as well. So back to our example, this is a classic sort of default that Facebook are using to push me back, in line with their purpose actually. And you can see I just re-signed up for Facebook this week just to see what the experience was like, hence my slightly dubious name. But you can see the purpose is to give people power to share and make the world more open, so they're trying to drive sign up. And you can see here, this is a classic behavioral economics nudge, last day. It wasn't the last day. It made me sort of so angry I waited another day to see if it was true. So the final couple ways that we can use product and design, the next one is never get distracted. You get distracted from your purpose. This is why I think you should have this standing meeting to reflect on what your purpose is. As soon as you get distracted from what it is, you start just disappearing and focusing energy on the wrong stuff. So a classic example I find amazing is actually Word, Microsoft Word for Mac. Now, Word 5 for Mac was hailed as a genius bit of software development. Amazing product. Word 6 was hailed as maybe the worst bit of software ever. What's the difference? The big difference was they tried to merge the functionality. They tried to sort of bring the two products together, but they forgot their purpose because we as users aren't flipping between Mac and PC all the time. You see this on mobile as well. All these people are trying to sort of force us to have exactly the same experience on Android and iOS. It's crazy because actually you should be matching the experience with the platform. And the final one, which I added in actually after Tom's talk, because it really got me thinking, it was interesting, and that was actually, I think both Tom's research and development bit are incredible design opportunities. Now, the first bit's sort of obvious. It's like, so I'm using probably a metaphor too far here. My idea is that these things, these buildings are kind of products that you can develop, and the taller they are, the better. Now, the A/B testing is a design opportunity because you can nudge up. You can get better and better, and you can design experiments. That's a product manager's job, that's a designer's job, that's an engineer's job. And you can slowly work your way up. I think this is actually development in Tom's example. You've got something and you just improve it, you make it more efficient. But our job is often to step back through the lens of our purpose and say, how can we design it better? I think great design drops us on the top of a taller building. It enables us to jump away from the paradigm we're constrained by, not just be efficient on that other example. And I think this is actually research. This is great design research, diving into what it means. So my question for you guys, my penultimate one, is does your product actually convey your purpose? When you have a break, open up the elements of your site, look at them all, and ask yourself, does this reinforce or does it jar with our purpose? Because if it jars, you're leaving space in the market for someone else to deliver better. And now the final one, which sort of a loop back around the power of purpose, the importance of it, is around recruitment and building great teams. And the important point is, like, we as individuals don't scale. We can't replicate ourselves like lemmings. Again, a huge stretch, but I loved that game. Anyway, one of the reasons is, we, particularly in the 80s, films like Wall Street reminded us that money was everything, cash was king. But it actually doesn't work. In fact, there's great analysis that have taught us that it only works in one specific way, and that's to incentivize people to do repetitive tasks. So often it's used in the example of factories. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just that's how it's used. It's sort of do something faster and more efficiently and you get paid by the unit. That's an incentive. The problem is the fact that you guys are in this room suggests to me that you're probably excited about something else, and that's motivation. Now the problem with incentive is if you're recruiting people that just care about the money, they probably don't care what they're doing. Your team doesn't care what the output is. And a classic sign, which I was thinking about putting in the first one, which really worries me deeply, and it's a good one to ask yourself. A classic sign of workforce that have joined for the wrong reasons is that they don't like the customer. They don't like the user. This happens more often in big companies than small ones, but it is terrifying. It's just a horrible, horrible sign. Instead, we need to rely on motivations, stuff that's important to people, stuff that actually, achievement, sense of recognition, sense of responsibility in our jobs. And then we build a movement. then we engage people to do something more than just cash. There's signs that this is becoming more and more important. I love this one. This is a startup in London that just got crowdfunded. It's called Escape the City, and it's a community site for people that just want to get out of the city, out of city jobs. So far, and this is primarily London, they've got 85,000 people signed up. Incentive doesn't work for these people. Motivation does. And that's our job. Again, Facebook, I think he's done a pretty good job of this. You saw in that pretty amazing letter that he sent to shareholders before the IPO, statements like this: we work hard at making Facebook the best place for great people to have a big impact and learn from other great people. He does hackathons. He makes the environment good there. He doesn't, or up to now, he's not just used revenue as a metric to judge people. Whereas again, if we look at Zinger, and I don't completely hate Zinger, but there are some examples that worry me. The reason I would not be as bullish on them is stuff like this. The chief engineer actually defended their culture, saying, we attract people who are obsessed with business outcomes rather than enamored with their own pet projects. It just screams of incentives. It just screams of actually cash rewards. And again, great startups grow by bringing in teams and getting evangelical about their purpose. So final couple of examples. One is Asana. So Asana, they look to, their purpose, if you like, is improve the productivity of individuals and groups to increase the potential output of any human effort. And they'll give their engineers, when they sign up, $10,000 to spend on their workspace because it's in line with the purpose. They want to give people the right environment to make a difference. This is actually the wrong photo. This is one of our studios in Palo Alto, where occasionally people just get kind of ridiculous with their desk space, and this is a desk space. Someone actually wheeled in a camper, opened up, literally hacksawed the side off, and you can see that's a working desk. So I'm not recommending going that far. And the final example, which I think is a lovely example of incentives versus motivation, is Zappos. Zappos, after they've trained people for 2 weeks of a 4-week training program, they offer them $1,000 to leave. If you're motivated, you stay. If all you care about is incentives, you go. I think they built a great business partly as a result of that. So my question for you guys, once you've gone through this question around what your purpose is are you building a movement toward that purpose? So finally, what is your purpose? Does it matter? What metrics tell you if you're tracking your purpose? The fewer, the better. Does your product actually convey your purpose? You guys as product guys, you have the purpose in your hand. That's the customer experience or the primary one. It has to translate across to that experience. And are you building a movement in your team around motivation rather than incentive? Thank you very much.